Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. As always, I'm your host Lefarius, and in this week's show we will be taking a look into The Lion King. Now that's probably not a game that you've all expected me to cover, but I think it's been a good while now. We've not really done any proper, movie license based stuff like this before, I don't think. I suppose RoboCop, that sort of counts, but that was really a bad game. Maybe it's time we try to cover something decent. Is that spoilers? I don't know, we'll have to find out in a bit. I was having a look at the download numbers for the show just the other day, and I can actually see whereabouts in the world that people are downloading shows from, and I was really surprised to see that people as far away as Australia are downloading the shows. I mean, I'm in the UK, so it really is on the other side of the world to me. Just a massive thanks to everyone who tunes in each week, no matter where you are. As long as you guys keep on listening, I'm going to keep doing new episodes. The one thing the Australian download showed me is that we really are appealing to a worldwide audience. I mean, I'm just one guy doing a show every week, and it just amazes me that anyone is even that involved from that far away. Yeah, what a weird thing to get caught up on, but what can I say? I'm a simple sort of guy. That's what I love about the internet. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, it just manages to bring Amiga fans together. I mean, we're probably a shrinking crowd by now as the years go by, but we gotta keep doing our best. I also think that this next bit counts as a bit of listener feedback, but I've been chatting back and forth with Steve B via email. He managed to find the podcast, must have been about a month ago now, and he told me that he's been working his way through every single episode. If you think about it, that's a bit of an epic task, especially with the number of shows that I've put out. I'm not even sure how much time that even comes to, but if you do the average episode, we must be about 20 to 30 minutes each time, and we've been over 80. God, there's got to be at least 24 hours of straight audio by now. Anyway, he's been enjoying it no end, and it's amazing to me when someone gets in touch just to talk about the show. Thanks for listening, Steve, and I look forward to a lot more decent content to come. I'm sure that we're going to get to cover Lemmings and Moonstone eventually. He did ask people. It's great when you guys get in touch, so you can always drop me a line on lefarius@amigarama.com or pop along to the Twitter account, because I will reply, and anything that I found really interesting will be mentioned in the show. In Amiga gaming news this week, I did manage to come across an awesome looking remake of a C64 platformer called Lumberjack Platform. Awesome name, by the way. Reading through its blurb, it's been enhanced for the Amiga and expands on what the C64 version was like. So lots of extra levels, I think, and plenty of special fancy effects. Now that is an AG8 edition, I believe. It had HD next to it, so I think it is. It's got a very strong Manic Miner vibe going for it. Single screen platformer, almost like puzzles, try to get around and survive and dodge the enemies and stuff, that sort of a style. It's been out since April, but you can get it for free over at Aminet now, and it seems to insist that it will only work on an A1200, but from some of the comments I've been reading online, it does seem to run on a spec'd up A500, so you'll need some fancy cards stuck in there. I don't know, is it a better processor or something like that? Sorry guys, I'm a bit out of the loop with the A500 stuff. Anyway, I'll stick a link in the show notes, as I don't want you lot to miss out on it, because it looked absolutely awesome. I'm not sure if these count as public service announcements, but I've always got my eye on lots of different tech news sites and stuff that keeps popping up on my YouTube account. This week I managed to catch something very useful for the Amiga 2000, especially for its fans, over on the Jan Beta channel. That's JAN space BETA. He spent a good 20 minutes showing off this fan replacement on the system, especially for the power pack, which is usually pretty loud, especially after all these years. These things are getting louder and louder, especially with age, so to see some modern tech improving something like that is always fun. He completely broke it down and showed what he used to replace it and stuff. Very handy. One day I'm gonna have a desktop Amiga of my own, I promise, so it's great that if I want to make some improvements over time, there's always going to be tons of decent how-to videos over on YouTube. And that's your lot, I'm afraid, for the news this week. You can always check out all that stuff in the show notes, because I always post links and stuff. And I'm afraid to say that we've not had any new iTunes reviews. I would really appreciate it, guys. If you want to contribute or help out in any way, I'd love that best, because it gets us out there. In fact, if you're using any sort of podcast app or anything that lets you post reviews, by all means get something stuck on there, because it helps us get noticed. Let's move over to our jungle adventure. I'm going to do my best to not launch into song on this week's show, but I definitely came close a couple of times when I was planning what we were going to do. It might sound odd to say that, but there's just something magical about The Lion King. I can remember sneaking off late at night to watch it back in the cinema 2 towns over. I think I was 12 at the time, and oh my god, my parents proper went off on one when they discovered what I'd been up to and where I've been going. I mean, I think I managed to watch it a grand total of 10 times in the first month. That's several times a week on some occasions. I must have been off me rocker, but I absolutely loved that movie. On one of the occasions when I was at the cinema, it must have been around 10 p.m. Keep in mind, I was only 12 years old, and when I managed to miss the last bus home, and then I had to ring my parents to come and pick me up, or I'd end up spending the night out there. This is a good distance from where I was living. God, it was almost an hour's bus journey at that point. They went nuts, I can promise you that now. It was not very happy times. In fact, you probably came close to losing your show host all them years ago. I have more of a history with the film than the actual game though, but that's mostly because I couldn't afford to buy a copy. And weirdly, I don't even know how I managed to afford to go to the cinema all that time. I must have been washing a lot of cars and doing newspaper rounds or something. I did manage to play this though on the Sega Mega Drive, but it never really appealed to me, and I never crossed paths with it over on the Amiga. I'm still quite fond of the movie, as you can probably tell, and no, I haven't seen it in years, strangely, so this is quite refreshing to be able to go back, especially with a fresh set of eyes, and just see how it turned out. Now, it was published and developed by Virgin or Westwood. They were one and the same company from what I could find out. Now, they'd worked on Cannon Fodder 1 and 2. This was mostly Virgin. Dune 1 and 2. Goal, that's something we really want to cover. I think I keep saying that. I can't find any information though. If I can find stuff, we'll do a show on it. We've also done Krusty's Funhouse. They worked on that to some degree. God, when did we do Krusty? Was that episode 18, 19? I can't even remember. It was that long ago. It came out in 1995 on just 4 floppy disks. This is an AGA game, so there was no earlier versions of it, which is quite strange considering it was a movie license, because you'd think they'd want to get it on as many systems as possible. Now, it had 1 player, that was it, and it was priced at £29.99, so quite a high price for an Amiga game, especially for the mid-90s, especially as the market was dying. Coding wise, it was done by Dave Simmons. He worked on Incredible Crash Dummies, Rainbow Warrior, that's the Greenpeace game I think, SAS, Combat Sim, Spellfire the Sorcerer. That's not Simon the Sorcerer in a different name or something? I don't know, I should have looked that one up as well. Graphics wise, Doug Townsley, again he worked on Incredible Crash Dummies, Kid Gloves 2, I think that's a platformer, and SAS Combat Sim. The music for this one was done by Alistair Brimble, quite an expert indeed. He's worked on Agony and all the Team 7T games, Dojo Dan as well, which is a really bad beat 'em up from what I've seen. I would like to cover that one as well, so we'll definitely dip into that at some point. Westwood, who started out as part of the Virgin Media Group, I think, approached the company to focus on a new Disney-based movie game. Not surprising, considering that they'd already done Aladdin, and I suspect from the sales of that one, because it did really well, they would have been really eager for them to do it again over at Disney. Anyway, the then president of Virgin, Martin Alper, called Lewis Castle into his office, basically telling him that if he wasn't impressed by The Lion King's intro, then he wouldn't push him into doing the game. Now, this was because Lewis's wife was actually pregnant with twins, so to say his mind wasn't on the job, well, it's a bit of an understatement. But when he saw Simba being lifting up to the crowds with that awesome wildlife music and track playing, you know, on top of Pride Rock, he knew he just had to be involved. And to be honest, that's the bit that always gets me hooked again, over and over, so it's no surprise he wanted to be involved. They only had around 8 months to get the work completed, as the movie wasn't that far from release, so this was a bit of a rush job. Disney were being quite tight-lipped with actual details on the film, mainly because they were worried about the story being leaked out to audiences before it managed to hit the screens. So right from the off, Westwood were faced with a struggle to find out just what they could for the rest of the story. Being told that in summary, the tale will be based around Hamlet with an aging Simba at different points in his life, they had just enough to start the story off. It's even more amazing if you think about it, especially compared to movies today where they always tend to give out like full spoilers in the actual trailer before the movies even come out. Splitting the work across 2 different types of games, one where the hero was his younger self and then the much older one. As they became aware of more and more of the story, they were able to readjust the levels of the way it played and the artwork to match it all. Lewis and the rest of the development team actually flew down to Disney Studios in Florida to see the film being worked on, and they're even allowed to speak to the animators. Thanks to previous work, Virgin had quite a good and trusted relationship with Disney, because they always seem to manage to get the games out on time and at a decent quality, selling in amazing numbers. Now, that's something not a lot of studios back then could always do, as I'm sure we've seen in many other games. Some of Ocean's come to mind. Just before the start of the game production, Dave Perry had left, which meant Virgin lost its usual platform game designer. This is the guy behind stuff like Earthworm Jim over on the Sega Mega Drive. You know, he really knew his platformers, so everything really was started from scratch, with Seth Mendelsohn brought on board as a replacement platform designer to help come up with something worthwhile. When it came to the game's amazing graphics, it turns out that they were actually drawing stick figures for the designs, which were actually being used in the game in its early stages. After this, they managed to pass them over to Disney's animators, who would then completely build animated graphics around them, effectively from scratch, to help match the design of the film and make it work with the game. This was done in part thanks to Virgin's ability to use something called Digicel processing, which allowed them to directly copy drawn images and convert them over into sprites. This was followed up by lots of compression to fit available memory space in the game, and then editing them into the designs that could then be added to the game itself. Having Disney's animators also meant they could also add movie-like animation, which pushed up the overall look and design quality of the game, something which I think stands out even today. Westwood just really wanted to make a good game that matched that amazing artwork in the film. They must have done something right, as The Lion King went on to be a smash hit across all the platforms it came out on, and it was also the best-selling game that Westwood ever released, even surpassing the likes of Aladdin, which had been a major hit before it. The Amiga port is easily on par with the likes of the Sega Mega Drive edition, especially when it comes to the graphics, but due to time constraints which led to the team being unable to code or test properly, it's missing a good few levels and bonus stages. Most of this was down to lead programmer Dave Simmons being given just 2 months to convert the game straight from the Mega Drive code in time for a Christmas release, so that's your publisher stepping in there causing problems. I can sort of understand why though. Lion King fever was gripping everyone, so it's no surprise that the publisher were pushing for it to come out so quickly and to be able to hit stores in time for Christmas. It is the busiest time after all. Although the manual does say that they aren't included because of the lack of disk space, it was solely down to Dave just not having enough time. Having to do all this so quickly, it turns out that he had to bring code across for the controls from other games that he'd worked on in the past just to save time. It might explain why there's such a difference in quality between the Mega Drive and the Amiga version. Ports wise, this came out on the NES, Super Nintendo, PC, Sega's Game Gear, Master System and the good old Sega Mega Drive, which is the port I'm most familiar with, though I would be interested to see what this turned out like on the Sega Game Gear. The Lion King brings to life the majesty and mystery of Africa through the tales of Simba, a lion cub faced with the challenging transition to maturity. Believing himself to be responsible for his father's death, Simba enters the wilderness where he finds salvation with Pumbaa the warhog and Timon the meerkat, and his education begins. Take control of Simba in his fight to claim his rightful place as the Lion King. From cub to lion prince, through interaction as detailed as the lush terrain. Unique feeling of controlling a four-legged hero is further heightened as Simba's strength and abilities grow. The experience gained from avoiding the trampling hooves of stampeding wildebeest and tackling heinous hyenas in the elephant's graveyard is invaluable for when Simba eventually confronts his evil uncle Scar in a battle to prove which of them is worthy to rule the Pride Lands. As an added bonus, you also get to control Pumbaa and Timon in 2 different bonus stages, which aren't actually in this one because it's the Amiga version. Oh well, sorry kids. The beauty of Pride Rock is the first thing you see when The Lion King starts its opening level. The lush green background set a sense of place in this awesome jungle environment. Simba is shown on all fours with a swinging tail and all the matching movie animation, just to give him something most other games don't have, especially from this time period. Honestly, the animation is on another level entirely. To the lower right of the screen are your lives with raw and energy bars set in place on top of the screen. There's no other score indicators or any sort of visual elements for a HUD, and the majority of your playtime will be spent taking in that view. This is a platforming game with an interesting twist though. They've decided to add 2 control types, leaving you the option to use fire for jump and up for raw, or the opposite way round. I did find it a bit easier to control, and it made for a really nice change of pace, as a lot of Amiga games just don't give you any option at all. The controls themselves are the basic affair of up for jump or fire for raw, which can be used to flip enemies upside down and then they can be pounced on. Jumping on them will also build up the raw bar, which could be considered to be more of a special attack, depends on your point of view, with just 1 hit taking it all the way back down to 0, so you've got to be careful. For the most part you will be leaping and bounding on top of the foe, so it's not quite as handy as you might actually hope. Pressing down in a direction rolls Simba along the ground. He's able to tackle enemies that can't be jumped on, but this has its limits with some being invincible even to that, so you've really got to take your time and plan out the enemies properly. Jumping near a ledge makes you grab on, and Simba can climb up at the press of a button, helping you to survive some of the long running jumps, possibly the shorter ones if you don't manage to get your timing right. Think the Prince of Persia ledge grab, just to give you a good idea of what they were going for. Based around Simba's aging, there's a point in the game where he grows into adulthood. Rather than pounce, he can now slash and maul the other enemies. The character becomes a lot stronger and he feels heavier, so the leaps and platforms that you come across take on this whole new feeling as you try to make your way through levels. Option menus tend to be a bit hit and miss, especially on the Amiga, but I was pleasantly surprised that this even had one. You can choose between several difficulty levels, so easy, normal and difficult. I don't know why I didn't just call it hard. Those give you a different number of lives with an extended energy bar and add more replay value, I suppose, to the game. Something I'm sure most parents would want, especially after paying out £30 for what was being marketed overall as a kids game. Normal mode, which I'm sure most listeners will look at, gives you 9 lives, and luckily there's plenty of chances to find out more hidden ones throughout levels, though you always need to keep a sharp eye out as they can be well and truly tucked away from sight. It's a good way to make you learn the stage layouts and explore a lot more. You will need them though, with the levels being quite large with only a few hits to be taken out each time. It's quite strange to think that this is a children's game because on most of the levels it's really tough to play and you will need every life to play through this. This is mainly in part because of just how tough it can be, because those enemies really can take a lot of pouncing just to take out. You wouldn't think a game based around the Lion King movie could really have many collectibles. I mean, what are they supposed to use? But they've gone well out of the way to place lots and lots of these bugs on the stages for Simba to collect. You know, it's drawing from that brief bit in the movie where he eats them and almost makes him sick. It's a nice nod to the film for sure, and it did make me chuckle. Some of these bugs will also restore things like health and even boost the power of Simba's roar. We have a few icons for like continue markers and extra continues that are dotted around the stages, but it's not all plain sailing, as there's also some bad bugs dotted around that can swoop in to attack or explode when you pounce on them. You've just got to make sure you're leaping all the right places and watch what you actually eat. All of the characters are based around familiar jungle animals, so it should be no surprise that the enemies are from the movie. They only increase in strength and difficulty from bugs to other larger creatures. There's even bats dotted around as Simba ages. A quick swing of the claws though will often see them down and out without too much concern if you can time it just right. We do need to talk about the visuals. I wasn't expecting the rich colours and wonderful way that the colours just pop out on screen. It's all about that amazing Disney animation. Every inch of what they managed for the Mega Drive has come straight across, replicated perfectly on the Amiga. Some of the level surrounds could easily put other Amiga platformers to shame. I can really see why Virgin were asked to do the game, as I'm not sure any other company at the time could even have done that sort of a similar look. Every set of the movie is represented to a pretty high degree, and although a lot was cut for the Amiga, there's still enough here to be taken back by. It really is visually impressive. What I really love about The Lion King is that it's packed with neat animations between stages with the characters, and like on the game over screen, characters like Rafiki even appear to shake their head in like a disapproving manner or just grumble in this really sweet voice sample to say that you've lost. I have to bring up the animations, of course. In parts of the levels, butterflies are floating around the scenery, and Simba will even play with them, even if it's just briefly, scooping them up in his paw or setting them free with a smile on his face. It's a great little touch, and it's littered throughout all of the stages. It makes the game feel a lot more alive than it has any right to be. All the animations really are top notch, and you can't fault the amount of work they've done to get it all in there. The music, for most parts, truly outstanding. It's good 16-bit renditions of the tracks from the film, and as a fan of it, it's easy to recognise just how good these versions actually are. I did laugh quite a bit at the opening screen because it sounded a bit like a kid playing a flute or a recorder. It was out of tune. That's how it came across to me. For the most part, they've done really well, and to add in the voice samples on top of that, you really are in for an audio treat. Most voice samples are only a few seconds long, but they happen quite frequently, and even though a few do get reused, it's not enough to annoy, and alongside those amazing visuals, it's one of the best parts of the game. It's that time of the show where we need to dig into some of the game's problems. First up, the hit detection is a little too strict. Simba is quite large when he's jumping around, even more so when he's a lot older, and sometimes when you think you've easily landed on someone, you get hit by it instead. I found you also need to wait for the animations to finish, which can also slow the flow of the game down. Level layouts are not always clear where you actually need to go. The graphics are great and all, but when it's hard to tell the background and foreground apart, the fancy landscape soon becomes a bit pointless. Lots of the levels are sprawling and it's not always easy to figure out a path through, so there's a bit too much trial and error for my liking. I suppose you would learn them over time if you stuck at it long enough, but who's got time enough for that these days? Add to this the amount of pixel perfect jumping required just to kill the enemies often meant I was frustrated and tearing my hair out, especially on some of the later stages. It's not always clear where you can scrabble on and clamber up on the platforms too, so it can be really easy to miss even simple jumps throughout the stages. The story and cutscenes on the consoles just aren't here. I'm sure that fans of the film would know what's going on, but to have zero parts of any sort of scene setting or movie clips or faces or anything, you're just faced with nothing to see. It's highly disappointing, especially for a game like this. Even a still image with a text scroll would have done the trick. At best it throws up the level names, and that's the only real link to the film beyond the actual look. The scrolling is as good as you would expect, but the frame rate does drop far too often. It doesn't do The Lion King any favours, as with too much action on screen it can chug along even on a higher spec Amiga, and I did try that with emulation and topping it out at a 68040 I think. It was as high as I could make it and it still had problems. The difficulty and controls seem to go hand in hand. Both don't do what they should, and having to explore large levels with it actively fighting against you makes it a lot tougher than it really should be. Yes, there's plenty of health pickups in there, but when the first stage can kill you a bit too quickly, there's not much point if you even can't get to him or survive. We do need to glance over at the magazine scores. The one gave it 77%, CU Amiga 76%, Amiga format 69%, these are dropping now, and finally the lowest, Amiga Power at 59%. I don't usually do this, but I wanted to see how this compared to the Mega Drive cart, and I was surprised to see that even though it's lacking for content, eye to eye they do compare really well. The problem is that Lion King has none of the gameplay. It feels a bit like wading through treacle when he's in the air. For a game that requires some near pixel perfect pouncing, it just adds to that frustration when the controls just aren't tight enough. The lack of any sort of story easily makes this one of the worst ports to play. Comparing it once more to the Mega Drive, which had movie screenshots with brief bits of animation laid over the top, some voiceovers mixed in there too, it just leaves this all being a little bit too empty. Even though I didn't hate this, and I could get far enough in to see the most interesting parts without too many issues, it just left me with a constant niggle that I was playing a much inferior port. For a title to come out in 1995, keep in mind this is years past when Amiga coders should have been struggling at all with the basics of what to do, and then leaving the player with a pretty subpar experience. Yes, I understand that, they incredibly pushed for time and they had to do whatever. It's all on the company really. It seems to happen far too often and it really isn't fair. On the coder or the player. Just because this was meant for kids, it doesn't mean that they don't deserve to have a good game, or at least one that doesn't feel unfinished. And I could well understand some staring across at the console counterparts, grumbling about why is that one more fun and why have I just paid this much money, mum? It's clear to me that Dave Simmons was really pushed for time and there's not much he could have done, so in a way I'm really annoyed at Virgin for letting this one out the door, especially in this unfinished state. It just needed more time, and yet again it's another big company chasing big Christmas sales. It seems to be quite common across the entire gaming industry, I mean even today. The console ports all had 10 levels to enjoy whilst the Amiga was stripped back to just 7, so out go the bonus stages, which in itself wouldn't be a bad thing, and I could even excuse it if the rest of the game was fun to play. There's something lacking about the whole thing and it's easily enough to put most people off. The parts where this don't struggle, that really feel like they've had a lot of care and attention thrown in at the audio and graphics. The scenery throughout every stage is stunning for the most part, and the fluid animations reminded me of being in a cartoon, and exceeds where most licensed games usually fail. You can feel the Disney in this. I mean, is that even a term? For the sound, the roar from Simba in his young and old form is quite cute and terrifying at the same time. That's when it's powered up fully, and it does at least have a sense of change when you finally become your older self, even if it is a bit too limited. It's out and out gorgeous to look at. They've done a fantastic job showing off the art, set pieces. Everything in the movie stands out a mile, even in that limited 16-bit fashion, and it's certainly something to show off that AGA chip can do. The downside of that though is it suffers from slowdown problems at times that I think I can only really put down to that taxing scenery. I did try upping the speed of the Amiga processor as I said before, and it achieved very little, so this is probably as good as it gets. It's sad to think that a studio could produce something so good looking with such great sound effects and let it all fall apart with the basics, the controls. Each stage is packed to the brim with songs from the movie in a way that does more than enough to get me music lobes tingling, but even after all that, I'm afraid that the circle of life ended a good long time ago for this one. That about wraps it up for this week's show. If you want to comment on anything you've heard today or even just drop me a line, you can do so on lefarius@amigarama.com. Pop by the Facebook page. I'm always posting all sorts of different pictures and videos and just chatting to folks about Amiga games in general. That's facebook.com/AMIGArama, or follow me over on Twitter, which is @AmigaRamaPod. It would be amiss if I didn't mention all of our awesome Patreon supporters. A big thank you to them as always. If you'd like to join in and offer some support, you can do so on patreon.com/AmigaRama. And this week's Patreons are 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, Adam Bradley, Darren Coles, Gary Heather, Graham Vebke, Glenn Milford from Casual Retro Gamer Weekly, Jason Warnes, Laurent Giraud, O'Brien's Retro and Vintage, great site by the way, Pistol, Bremsky, Wentin Barnes, Retro Ravi from the Retro Hour podcast, Richard Legg, Richard Pearson, Sneff, Steve Engeldoe, and finally Treble. Thanks for listening, and until next time guys.